I'll ask that question again. Just quickly, can you talk about your introduction to Labyrinth?
We each have individual stories, so it's a unique perspective on it, I guess.
Well, the Labyrinth came to us through our work, through doing landscaping and hardscaping, and then we had a phone call, from the landscape architect, and we really had no idea anything about what a labyrinth was at that point. But I had actually been to a sweat lodge the night before, and one of the questions was, what do you want to do with, what's coming up for you in the rest of your life, and how are you feeling? And what my comment was that I feel so small in this world, and how I would love to be a part of something bigger. And the next day, that shark labyrinth came delivered to our house from the delivery man, and we opened it up, and we knew right at that moment that this had huge meaning for us in our life. We didn't know how, we didn't know the spiritual part of it, but we knew it was really important, and I knew then that I was going to be a part of something much bigger. And here we are, still on that path.
As she said, we were hardscapers and working in the suburbs of Chicago, and we were advertising and started doing murals and logos for sports teams and corporations and stuff in front of their corporate headquarters like Dial and other places. So we advertised in a national landscape publication, monthly publication, that we could do this mural logo thing. And from that ad, a gentleman from Asheville, Carolina, North Carolina, I guess it is, called and said, "Can you build a shark labyrinth?" And I said, "What in the heck's a shark labyrinth?" And he said, "I've been looking for someone to build one for 3 years, and no one's even crazy enough to tell me they can. And you probably can't do it either." And I said, "Well, you got a picture of this thing?" And he said that he had a drawing from a CAD guy that he didn't think was accurate. He thought the guy had messed it up a little bit, but he could send it to us, which is what she's talking about. And he also said, if you are interested in this, you need to get a book written by a gentleman in St. Louis that talks about the proportions and how to paint them. But at least it'll give you a heads up of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And if you're interested, get that, read it, and after you've consumed that, if you feel you can do it, then we should talk further. And I became completely obsessed. I mean, I was literally Richard Dreyfuss playing in his mashed potatoes for the next month and a half. I mean, I was not home. I was just all in. And I can literally remember we had a crew of men working with us at the time, and we were working on a residential project. And I remember taking the CAD drawing that she just mentioned and spreading it out on the deck and saying, "Guys, come here, come here. This is important, but I don't know why, but I know it is." And they didn't, only one of those guys got it. The rest of them kind of faded off into their own thing, and we actually gave them our business and a bunch of our equipment so they could continue on doing what they do. We didn't want to take their livelihood away from them, but at the same time, we knew our life was headed in a different direction. So kept one of the trailers, gave them one of the trailers, and helped them actually, because phone calls kept coming for residential work that we really couldn't do because we were doing labyrinths. So we would just hand them off to them, and even help them with a few appointments because they were worried they didn't have the sales skills to handle it. So I even went on a few of the sales appointments for them to help them stay afloat at the same time. They were good guys. So I guess that's kind of it. One other side note, that guy that stayed with me before all of this even happened, like she said at the sweat lodge, we were driving, I can remember exactly the point on the road. We were driving home from one of our residential projects, and he and I were analyzing. I had told him we possess skills that we'll never be able to demonstrate because someone they don't want something that radical in their driveway because they can't sell their home then. They might love it personally, but they're always thinking about, when I want to sell this house, I have this craziness in my driveway or in my patio, or, we could go to a place that is absurd, but no one will ever want it. We need someone to challenge us. And literally, just like she said, a day later is when the guy calls from Carolina and says, can you build a shark labyrinth? So having that analysis prior to that phone call is almost like a necessary part of it, so that when he called and said, you can't do it, it spurred that, oh yes, I can. This is exactly what we've been waiting for, even though I didn't know what it looked like. If it's that hard and difficult that you've been looking for someone for 3 years, then clearly it's quite the challenge.
It's as if every step in our life really led up to us doing this work, and there's no doubt about it. Everything from him loving art and sculpture, being a hot tar roofer, doing the residential work, it's as if everything, so much as if we were meant to be doing this on the planet.
Sometimes
Just at this time on the planet.
Sometimes I describe it as like the path of the labyrinth, and also that bowling alley with the rubber in the gutters. We kind of feel like we're just going down the path, banging off the edges of a labyrinth, and we can't fall off. We just keep rolling forward, bouncing our way towards wherever we're supposed to be, and almost like very much like we're guided, but we're not in control of where it takes us. One other thing that happened very early on when the labyrinth thing was in our life and we were deciding how do we make it and all that, we were working at our desk and the TV was on off in the corner in the background, and Oprah was on, and she said, well, I'm not a big Oprah fan, but this was a big moment. She said, I believe there's no such thing as luck. There's only opportunity colliding with preparedness. And that seemed so appropriate at that moment, where we were deciding, should we pursue this thing? We know it is, and here's the opportunity. It was like exactly the words we needed to bring that whole thing that we've been explaining into one little nutshell and make what we were feeling make sense.
One of the things I keep hearing is that people don't go to the labyrinth comes to them.
Yes,
That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Wow.
We've made very few decisions. They make it. We don't make them. We just do them.
Wow. And then you wanted to talk about St. Louis in 1997.
I wanted to ask about that. The very early days. The impression I've been given is that you went to the first gathering conference at that point in 97, St. Louis 1 they call it. And how did you happen to come, and how did you feel about being there, and once you walked in, and then how was it different when you left?
Robert Frey is the one who invited us, so we really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into at all, but we knew we wanted to be a part of it. So we showed up, and they welcomed us with open arms, and just it was such a blessing to be asked to be there. And I'm gonna cry. Again, we felt like we were with family immediately, and so blessed to be there.
This was after you had built the river.
We had made the first one in Naperville, and to thank Robert Ferre for that book that the gentleman mentioned, we sent him a couple photographs and telling him, thank you so much for all of your knowledge, and this is what we were able to accomplish with that knowledge. And the phone rang right after he received the envelope and said, I've got these people coming to St. Louis and you need to be here. As a matter of fact, we're full up and you can't be here, and there's no room where we're having this event, so you need to get off-site lodging and show up at lunch the first day, and I'm sure they'll invite you to stay, which is exactly what happened. But an important point I think that it sticks out for me in that is, because we weren't really initially invited, we kind of felt like we were observing their circle, right? And we were fairly new to labyrinths too, where these folks seemed to be
They were
well
indie.
into labyrinths,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So we were the newbies in the crowd. And when they handed out a list of all the attendees so everyone could take one home, and because they were from all over the world, and not every, well, most people, you know, quite a few of them didn't know each other, right? So they were passing out the names, and at the bottom was guests, Marty and Debbie Kermeen. And I remember Sig Longren raising his hand, which we all were very careful to not step on someone's toes and take your turn in the circle. No one carried more weight than anyone else, which I found so refreshing, because where does that happen ever, especially in the corporate world or business world or construction world or anywhere else? We were all equal in the circle. But Sig raised his hand and says, I have a problem with this guest list, or attendees list. There's no such thing as a guest in this circle.
And then you have, we heard such lovely stories last night of all the beautiful labyrinths you've created for so many people and provided so many services that are ongoing and will, for, what was the estimate, something like 30,000 years.
3.5 million people.
So it seems that there was an epiphany that happened because you transformed your lives in the service of the labyrinth. So how did you make that decision? How did you make that choice?
Okay. Jody, you want to ask that again?
We heard so many stories last night about all of the wonderful labyrinths that you've built that for so many reasons, for so many service potentials and lots of people, and the estimate was that you were going to be changing tens of thousands of lives, and certainly have up to this point, and you're far from done. What was it that made you dedicate your lives, your fortunes, it seems very risky, to have done so at the time when you'd never heard of a labyrinth and you didn't know what they were going to do, what they were for? You said you knew they were powerful, but you didn't know why. How did you decide to make that choice to give up what was, I'm assuming, a stable and lucrative income and identity, and transform into quintessential labyrinth builders?
Me or you?
Well, I can start. We saw how it affected the people. You know, we saw how people were healed and how they loved the labyrinth, and that that made it so that our passion and putting them out into the communities and seeing that ripple effect spread out to so many people, and how important it was to the world. And that's what did it for me. It was tough. I mean, it was really hard sometimes because we didn't know, are these labyrinths going to keep coming? And there were years where we didn't have much of an income because of it. So, but we knew it was important. So that's why we kept going forward.
I agree with all of that. It was almost an internal thing that we just knew, almost as if we'd made them before and understood their importance. And I don't think there was ever really a conscious decision. I think it just was a understanding that this is who we are. And there wasn't a moment that I can remember where we sat down and said, we're going to change who we are and what we do. We just knew that was where we were going without even really discussing it. So it was...
Our trip with Jeff and Kim Sayward to Sharp was a big part of it, I think, also because we were able to see that beautiful ancient labyrinth there, and it took us back. It took us back in time, and really helped us to realize how important this labyrinth was, and the antiquity of it, and then just actually being there and feeling the masons that created that beautiful labyrinth, and the people that took care of them. You know, you could actually see the love going in and how important that was.
Yeah. Like I said about the bowling alley and the rubber gutters, it wasn't really a conscious decision. It was just banging along the path, heading towards the center.
Was there ever a moment where you said, wait a minute, what are we doing?
5-10 times
Quite
a
a
year for every year we've been doing it. But the stories that we were relating last night in the presentation, those are every time we get to the point where we're just about to say, you know what, this is hard. You know, we had young daughters. Debbie was
Marty
staying
was
home.
gone a lot.
There was
Our daughter got very sick at one point. Thought she had cancer, and he was in Texas. He was here, and I was at home alone, and it was very scary. So, but we also had people praying for us. All these labyrinths that we've made, you know, the internet and emails, and it was just like I sent out emails and phone calls to people, and they all started praying, and she ended up fine. It wasn't cancer, and it was, you know, but all the prayers that came in from all the projects we've done. So these little things are what really kept us, I shouldn't say little, these big things that really helped us to know, you know, that we were on the right path, and this is our passion in our work, and that we could keep moving forward.
So it was a community, essentially, that gave you the impetus, the strength,
Yes,
the desire to continue.
absolutely.
The stories, some of them like we related last night, it seems like just when we were at our wits' end and enough is enough, there was one period where when our daughters were young, I was not home for 20 out of 24 months. Building labyrinths, just come home and go and come home and go, and we eventually learned how to cut pieces at home and palletize them and to send them to ourselves and meet them versus cut them on site. But the first several, I was afraid to do that, didn't have a complete understanding of how it all went together, and it just took a while. I mean, hopefully I've gotten better on every single one I've created, and that's the goal, is to always improve and be better. And at some point we realized that a lot of this could be done at home, but it was a challenge at first, and we thought about throwing in the towel often. But the stories of the people's experiences on the labyrinth, especially the really powerful ones, that some of them we related last night, just, I mean, how do you stop after you hear something like that, you know? And like, as for example, New Orleans, after witnessing thousands of people walk through that labyrinth that day and hug and heal and weep and just mean so much to them, okay, let's quit now. No, can't do it. You just simply can't do it.
How did you come to create the Truth and Reconciliation Labyrinth, which I always thought came from South Africa?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that you were
A
responsible.
lot of people don't realize that.
Talk to me about that. How did it
Came
come
after
about?
September 11th.
Want me to do it? So, when we were at one of the gatherings, a gentleman named Lynn Meserve said that he's had this thought. We look back at ancient labyrinths and we marvel at them, right? Their design, their patterns, their construction techniques and things like that. But when the future looks back at now, this current revival, what is the pattern of today? What are they going to see? Us looking back further? They're going to look back at us and all they see is us looking back further? What is the labyrinth for today? He said, you're the builders. You need to come up with a new pattern that's designed for today. The dawn of a new paradigm. I didn't even really understand what that meant, but I soon realized, and I was sitting at our kitchen table drawing labyrinths over and over and over, trying to think, and I thought, well, 9 circuits, it's an odd number, it's not 7, it's not 11, let's try 9, that's unique. And I was drawing, connecting U-turns and things like that, seeing what I could come up with, just filling in time. And Debbie was at the sink washing dishes, and I had one that was complete, and I wanted to make sure that it went all the way to the center, because it's easy to make a closed off section, or skip a section or something. So I was following it along with my pen, and all of a sudden I realized I'd walked all of the left side. Then I went over to the other side and walked all of the right side. I said, well, this is no good. Who's going to want to do that? And I literally took the papers, crumpled it up, tossed it in the can that was about 8 feet away. And Debbie says, no, you've got it wrong. She wiped off her hands from doing dishes, went over there, spread it out, and she said, this is a labyrinth for 2 people. And this was right after 9/11. And I said, well, she said, it's a labyrinth with 2 paths. And I said, but the definition of a labyrinth is a unicursal path that leads to the center. And she said, you're the one that's looking for a dawn of a new paradigm. And I said, how does that work? And she says, right here, try to make 2 entrances that come in. And then I did some erasing and did some more penciling, and it came about by that. So it was a compilation. I actually threw it in the trash, and she pulled it back out and saved it and came up with the solution on how to make it a 2-person labyrinth. And that's how and it seemed appropriate for that time, because I'm sure because 9/11 had just happened, and it seemed like the world needed to look at the world in their partner's footsteps rather than only seeing your own perspective on the world and life. If we could just see it from someone else's point of view as well, then the world would be a better place. And that labyrinth actually makes that happen, because after walking all of your side, you come to a sharing place where you can hug, shake hands, whether it's conflict resolution or marriage or whatever. Then you pass by each other and walk in their footsteps, see the world from their perspective. And believe it or not, when you walk all of one side, you take ownership. And when you're on the other side, it actually feels a little awkward at first.
So
You feel like you're on the wrong, like you're on the wrong side in a different place. And after walking it for a while, you start to get comfortable with the fact that you're over there, and it is different than where I just was and how I see things. So, and then you have to come together, get over your differences, and it is the path that leads to the center isn't 2 paths or 1 path, it's a path and a half. So you have to share that path to get to the center. So that's how it came about.
And if I wouldn't have saved it, then it wouldn't be doing all this healing in South Africa. So I'm so glad I grabbed that out of the garbage can.
It would have been in the landfill.
How did it end up in South Africa?
Claire Wilson came to one of my workshops in Sacramento, California, and she walked in the door and she saw the design. And I think it right away, immediately when she saw it, she knew that it had a lot of potential for her country, and to help with some healing. And then when she asked us if she could change it slightly and use it, and we said, of course, it would be wonderful to be a part of that. And then she actually opened up and made a 3rd path so that they could use it in that way for people to have more room to come to the center and out together. And she put feet on it, so it really looks like a person, like a human form. And then it's had babies. It just keeps growing. I believe there's a couple of them also in the States here that have been created. I can't remember where they're all at, but yeah, it keeps having babies now from that original design I took out of the garbage.
How did you know to do that? You were doing the dishes. That's a pretty mundane task.
Yeah.
And yet you were called.
Yeah. Well, September 11th, because that was going through my head, and there was just so much healing in our planet that needed to happen. And I just thought, this has a lot of potential here to be more than what he thought it was. So I was called. Yeah, I was just called to go and get it out of the garbage and rethink it with him and make some changes, add the paths, and I'm so happy I did.
I had verbalized that it was a not valid labyrinth, because I'm like, oh my goodness, I did all this work generating this, and who's going to want to walk all of one half and then all of the other half? That's ridiculous. Nobody's going to want to do this. The whole point is to be confused and give up control and all of that sort of thing. And so I thought it was a non-valid, just simply a non-valid labyrinth. So I just scrunched it up and pitched it. So by verbalizing that, I think she realized the potential, because there was one side and then the other side. And I think that's what motivated her to have the vision that she did, by me telling her there was two sides that were totally independent of each other.
What I like to do toward the end of these conversations is to kind of act on the energy that happens sometimes when you talk to someone and you get to the, oh man, I wish I would have said, or oh, if I would just thought to ask that question, or oh, if we could just go back, I would add something. So that's what this time is. It's your chance to think of any story, any pearl of wisdom, anything you want to share.
Oh,
Well, what's coming to me are all the angels that have come into our life through our work. We have stories of people who just show up to keep us going. Times when we're like, this is, we've had enough, we can't do this anymore, and somebody will come, and I call them our angels, and they will have just the right words. It'll just be perfect synchronicity
exactly
to keep
the right
us going
time.
at exactly the right time, including being asked to be presenters, here, and having that standing ovation. It just did our heart so much good.
It validates our incredibly, it takes a lot to do this. I mean, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of arranging, a lot of travel, a lot of hotels, a lot of city councils and church committees, and all of the energy that it takes to do this and make it work is overwhelming almost. And if there wasn't
Including
two of
Marty's
us-
body. His hands, he has no fingerprints left.
in Mexico City, they called me the man with no dedos. Because you needed to get into the compound, you needed to use your fingerprint and your pass key, and my fingerprints never worked, so they thought it was hilarious as could be. Every morning when I'd show up to go to work, oh, it's the man with no dedos.
Well, you gave something up and you've gotten something in return.
Absolutely.
There was a
We-
comment that was made early on, I think it was Helen Curry was talking about, at the very beginning, there was the classical labyrinth and the Chart labyrinth.
Mhm.
And it seemed that there was this dividing line in the early days of, people who preferred the classical or preferred the Chart. And then someone, Lee Good Harris, I think, came up with the Santa Rosa pattern.
Mhm.
And it kind of sent this tremor through the organization. It's like, you can do that? You can come up with a new idea, a new design, and it was, this earthquake moment of realization. And then there was is that okay? Why does that not feel okay to do? But you've gone on to create any number of new designs, new patterns, particularly the one I think of as Oklahoma, the Heart Labyrinth, that was so specific to the needs of the community that you were hired to serve. How do you feel about that movement? Were you aware that, you were just learning the Chart Labyrinth at that time as a thing, moving into creating such a wide variety of different kinds of labyrinths? How did that happen? How did you feel about it?
I think it kind of goes back to Lynn, doesn't it? And
Sure does.
that quote that you use quite often.
There's historic labyrinths that were needed, and the patterns that they designed were for that time, and these are not 2,000 years ago. This is now, and this is what is needed today. And if the pattern is not valid, then you'll never see another one of that type of pattern. If it is valid, then people will want it, and they'll receive the healing. But what we've learned is the majority of them, if it is a good pattern, they all heal. They all do the good work. What people need is generally received no matter the pattern. I tell quite often that I literally spend my entire life pursuing perfection, trying to create the roundest, most precise, perfect things that I can possibly build. But yet, the flip side of that is my absolute favorite walk was outside of Evergreen, Colorado, on a mountainside made out of boulders where you literally had to jump across the arroyos and trenches and washed out places and skip around boulders that were in the way and all of that. It was really being a part of Mother Nature at the same time. So I don't think there is really such a thing as a bad labyrinth pattern. Maybe a couple of them are a little wrong, or not wrong, but not well thought out. And but it seems like almost all labyrinths worked, and usually because the user comes with intent, and then they find what they're looking for then. But not always. As a story we talked about in Oklahoma with a lady that was a victim of domestic violence. She didn't know what a labyrinth was, but yet she still found healing. And she had never even heard the word labyrinth in her life. All she did was realize there was a path she could follow, and she started following it. And she received what she needed. And I'm sure she brought that need with her. But why did the labyrinth bring that out in her? Why not walking down the city sidewalk, or walking to the kitchen to get a drink of water, or, you know what I mean? Why did it happen here? So there's something very valid and powerful there.
Do you have a favorite?
Huh?
Do you have a favorite?
Labyrinth that we've made or walked or? That's a tough question, because there's favorite pattern, favorite place, favorite, you know. Well, I have a tattoo of a 7-path on my leg, so that's pretty
I was
important
going
to
to ask
me,
you about
honestly.
that.
But when we walked into Chartres Cathedral, Debbie said we were there with Jeff and Kimberly Sayward. When I finally walked in the door and saw the labyrinth, I felt like I had just returned home, like homecoming. So I guess I would have to say that one. I know it is to a lot of people, but maybe my reasons are different than theirs. Not to say mine's more important or less important or theirs. Just for me, it felt like a homecoming. And maybe it's just because I had longed to go there for many years at that point. Maybe that's why. But it seemed much greater than that. So, how about you? You have a favorite?
Thank you for asking. My favorite would be the Heart Labyrinth. So I just, the community, that has so many layers involved in that labyrinth, you know, and so much about the community, and not so much just about us, but about the, you know, the ancient designs, but more about the heart of the community, of the people. So to me, I would say that the Heart Labyrinth was my favorite. And by the way, I was not a part of that at all. I've never even walked that labyrinth, but I will someday.
Anything else? Anything else?
I mean, we could go on for
Thank
days.
you.
Yeah, we may.
Yeah, I have
But-
a feeling